Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of our monthly webinar, Incidentally Informed. Today we're looking at how responding to a cyber attack has changed 1 year into COVID. So this topic is, is very relevant right now. We are 1 year into COVID. Remote working is not going to be going away anytime soon. So we're looking at the reasons for the attacks, why they're occurring, and the future of cybersecurity post-COVID. So I'd like to introduce us. We are Cyberclan. We are a global leader in end-to-end cybersecurity, offering risk assessment, managed security services, post-breach remediation services as well. So today we have a poll as well as part of our webinar. There we go. So we'd love to see you interacting with this. So the questions include, have you been a victim of a cyber attack? Do you have cyber insurance? Do you currently use a managed security services provider? So as part of our services, we do also offer managed security services. So that's the reason for that question. Wonderful. So I think we can pop that down now. Right. So today we are very lucky to be joined by some wonderful panelists. We have Priya from Beazley, Imran from Norton Fulbright, Dominic from McDonald Hopkins, and our very own Dwayne, Director of Incident Response here at Cyberclan. Hello everyone, welcome. So yeah, this is your chance to introduce yourselves. Should we start with Priya? Oh, you might need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, I'm Priya. I'm from the Beazley Breach Response Services team out in Canada. I primarily handle the incidents out in Canada, also in US, as well as risk management services that we provide to our insurance, both proactive and reactive services.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. Imran.
Hi, everyone. My name is Imran Ahmad. I'm a lawyer and a partner at Norton Rose Fulbright Canada. Split my time between Montreal and Toronto. I also head up our national technology and innovation practice and co-chair our privacy and cybersecurity groups and lead a team of incident responders when it comes to cybersecurity or privacy breach events.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. Dominic. Oh, Dominic, you need to unmute. Sorry. There you go.
Hi, sorry about that. Thanks again to Cyberclan for having me. I am Dominic Paluzzi. I co-chair our data privacy and cybersecurity practice at McDonald Hopkins, where we assist entities through responding to thousands of incidents and breaches, and we also work on the front end pre-breach services, providing those to our clients, and we have a specific niche in the cyber insurance market, assisting insureds through these types of events.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Dominic. And finally, Dwayne.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. I am Dwayne Robinson. I'm the Director of Incident Response here at Cyberclan. So yeah, happy to join my colleagues here. This is should be a fun event.
Brilliant, thank you. So let's jump right in, shall we? My first question was, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a huge rise in the remote workforce. What problems did this cause? And how did we work on resolving them? So Dominic, let's start with you. Oh, Dominic, we can't hear you, sorry.
How about that? Does that work now?
Yes, that's better.
Great, great. So certainly, yes, as everybody, very abruptly turned to remote environment, right? We saw, as anticipated, the threat actors certainly took advantage of that. So, we saw a bit of a brake pressed on cybersecurity awareness and training, and really, again, that abrupt sort of shift and need to all start working remotely. And so you had a breakdown in many organizations' protocols, policies with respect to devices and security, and using public Wi-Fi's and saving things locally onto desktops, not on secure environments. And so as a result, we saw a ton of very spear phishing directed email compromises, compromising credentials, which then allowed threat actors to take advantage of those, exploit those credentials, and we saw a ton of wire fraud and ransomware, and obviously continue to see both of those. But I think it was this whole shift and focusing so much on just obviously safety, healthy of individuals, but then the health and hopefully stability of the organization. And as a result, there was a break that was really pressed on privacy and security and training and awareness. And we're still seeing that yet today.
Yeah, I think, we've definitely seen that as well, haven't we, Dwayne?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, can I share my story real quick? Because I was actually in a different role when the pandemic first hit. And like a lot of the clients we have today, we were largely based in the office, right? All our security stack was in the data center, very traditional sort of makeup. And then we had, maybe a few thousand people typically working from home. Then instantly overnight, we went from 3,000 to 30,000. Of course, so that puts strain on the VPN technology, collaboration tools so that people could communicate because we're used to going into offices. We started ramping those up, but our internet connections and stuff couldn't handle that. So yeah, all the security posture was built for in the data center, and now instantly overnight, we're relying on these very weak endpoints to do the protection, and it just wasn't there, right? So it was a lot of scrambling, and what people probably don't remember, up until just before the pandemic, there was all sorts of activity. Like it was hard to get hardware for companies and stuff. People weren't shipping things around because there's Roblox, at least in North America, there's Roblox, and it was a crazy time for sure. But that was it's still the endpoint is the weak link, and unfortunately, we're still relying on it heavily today. But yeah, that was my story. It was a little different because I was on the other side of the fence at the time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Dwayne. Priya?
No, definitely, I will echo exactly what Dom and Dwayne have said. There was a rush to get everyone to work from home remotely. It was the juggling of that, as well as IT having to juggle their regular maintenance of schedules, of patches and so forth, which got dropped down, which also made it very advantageous for the threat actors to also take advantage of, right? Just leaving things unpatched. So I think it was just really a combination of folks scrambling to get everyone up and running remotely, as well as trying to do the regular maintenance that comes along with having an infrastructure, network infrastructure. And I think that's what got us caught. And I think a lot of companies are now in the catch-up mode or have been able to catch up successfully. We have seen changes in companies' behavior. A lot of folks now are at the tail end of things whereby they are practicing good hybrid hygiene by implementing MFA, having robust training exercises, doing regular phishing sessions with their employees. So I think we are starting to see a bit of change in attitude from the very start of the pandemic, whereby it was, here's a laptop, go work from home.
Yeah, so as part of our risk management services as well, we do offer vulnerability testing and penetration services as well. So, we've definitely seen a bigger uptake in those as well during the pandemic. Imran, have you got anything to add?
the benefit of going after Dominic, Dwayne, and Priya is that all the good points have already been made. So maybe just a couple of quick observations. So, it feels a long time ago, but if you go back to March and April of last year when the pandemic hit, and we're really when the remote working started becoming sort of the mainstay, we initially saw a 3 to 5 time increase in terms of the number of cyber incidents that were occurring. And we thought it was a bit of a spike. We thought, honestly, initially that this is going to subside over time. What was interesting was that number, once it reached that spike, remained at that level. So net, we have seen an increase in the number of incidents. And I will say, and I know Priya and Dom and others will have the same view, I'm sure, in the first few weeks and months after the remote working initiative was started across all organizations, we saw an uptick on business email compromise primarily. And the reason was everybody was moving to Office 365 or remote working, and typically rolling out MFA. Not that it's super complicated, but it does require IT to have bandwidth to answer questions and support people. So they were rushing to move people to remote work. They're accelerating their digital transformation. And we saw a BEC increase initially, which was quite surprising. We then saw ransomware take over, in my view, as being the leading issue. And that sort of stayed in that range. So we have still a good mix between BEC and ransomware, but I sort of look at the period of the pandemic as being a first end on BECs primarily, and then a big shift towards ransomware. Last point I'll mention, I think Priya did a really good job of summarizing it. My practice is really a technology-based practice. And when we look at an IT environment, imagine a triangle, and at each tip, you've got either data, hardware, or software. What the attackers are ultimately trying to do is take advantage of one of those three, all three of them. Rare are the instances where they can intercept data. That's pretty rare, quite frankly. We hear a lot about public Wi-Fi, but during the pandemic, not such an issue. But in terms of hardware, where people are using home computers, which may not be the best computers in terms of the antivirus or any kind of other detection tools that they may have, being used for remote working, or work laptops where being used for personal use. And then to Priya's point about the patching piece, it's not that people don't know what they're supposed to patch. They don't have bandwidth to patch it. They're doing other things because it's all remote. So those are the trend lines that we have seen generally, but echo all the points that were previously made.
Wonderful, thank you. So my next question is, have you seen an increase in any particular services needed by your clients during a cyber attack that they have experienced? Let's go for Imran first this time.
Okay, so now I have to make all the good points right on the front.
Now it's your turn to make the good points, yeah.
It's not so much in terms of services. I think the support as a lawyer that we offer, in terms of breach counsel, is making sure the investigation is set up properly from a privilege standpoint, advising the client on any kind of legal or contractual obligations they may have. And then also, to the extent there's any kind of communication that's going out, not that we're comms experts, but certainly to vet it for proper disclosure and the appropriateness of the communications. Those haven't really changed. What I have seen is a change in terms of the scope of those pieces. Where historically we would not see a ton of B2B issues coming up, we're seeing a significant uptick because a lot of folks are just in time, sort of part of a supply chain, or are integrated to clients. We're seeing much more of a B2B communication strategy. I got to call my top clients and tell them what's going on. How do I answer difficult questions? Hey, their CISO wants to have a conversation with our forensic folks. Do we take the call, not take the call? How do we deal with that? So we're seeing a lot more of that piece. And the last part I'll mention, and I'm sure others will want to build on this, I'm sure we'll touch it generally as well, the data theft component with ransomware, which has become significant. And it's not small amounts. These are gigabytes, if not terabytes of data. And so as a result, we're seeing much more data mining. And the data mining is not your run-of-the-mill PII or personal information data mining, but corporate sensitive data. So regrettably, what I've seen is the costs go up in terms of managing those breaches, more so in the last 6 months than I had seen in the first part of the pandemic.
Thank you. Dwayne, from a cybersecurity, from our standpoint, what sort of services are we seeing our clients needing most at the moment?
Yeah, Imran already stole everybody's thunder, but absolutely, ransomware negotiations have been on the increase, for sure. And as Imran mentioned, a larger portion of them, a larger portion of the ransomware attacks do include exfiltration, right? So there's there's been an increase of that over the course of the year. A couple months back, it was kind of all over the news, the Hafnium exchange proxy logon that kept us, smoking busy for a few months and stuff there as well. So that and as that evolved, we saw that as an introduction. Like several of those turned into full-blown ransomware attacks and stuff as well. But yeah, that's probably the big one that comes to mind.
Yeah, so from our perspective, really, we're seeing people needing more restoration services than anything else, aren't we? So restoring their systems from backup and so on. Priya.
No, definitely there has been an increase in ransomware. There's no doubt, and that has been in both Canada and US, and I'm pretty sure international as well. The one thing that I would say, and I would agree with Imran, is that the level of services of engagement with the insurers have definitely increased. No matter if it's a small insured or big insured, I think that everyone is requiring the same level of service to a certain degree, whereby there is that education component. What is a ransomware? How do you deal with it? And also what you should be saying out there, right? Again, it's like too much information. How do you really curate the information that you have for the insured? I think that has been really key in working with both Imran and Dom. They have done a really great job with our insureds in leading them to the correct strategy or providing them the right playbook for ransomware, along with our forensics team, such as Cyberclan, right? I think the ecosystem that we have of a really solid privacy council, forensics, and as well ransomware negotiator, having that great playbook has all assisted our insureds, especially with the increase in ransomware and also with the supply chain attacks that have been happening, right? So I think, just having that playbook has been really helpful.
Fantastic, thank you. So as we mentioned before, Dominic mentioned earlier, the different types of cases that we've seen since the beginning of the pandemic as well, including phishing, and now we're seeing a lot more in regards to COVID vaccine phishing incidences as well, and the dangers of using public Wi-Fi, etc. But as we are starting to see more in terms of ransomware attacks as well, are we seeing differences in the way that they're working? Are we seeing that people are asking for more money, etc.? Dominic?
Sure, yeah, and to echo what Imran said, right, we sort of saw this influx of these email compromise matters, and then you take that coupled with what Dwayne mentioned about the 0 day, right, and so it's kind of like this perfect storm where you have now all of these credentials and the threat actors are taking advantage. Open RDP, we heard a lot about that, right? That seems to have been always the case. That was the way they were getting in, right? We saw a real shift into phishing emails and a phishing compromise that then was able to allow these threat actors to get in and deploy ransomware. So I think we've seen certainly the open RDP are still going to be exploited, but I think the shift in the influx of the phishing campaigns that we've seen, many of them very COVID related, right? We saw in the beginning of COVID, it was, click on the map to see the hot areas in the states and cities. And it was very easy, right, for folks to fall victim because they tapped into that emotional, right, sort of behavior that we were all, the whole world was dealing with. And now we've seen, click here for COVID vaccinations, right? So threat actors continue to, get creative. But yes, we have certainly seen a rise, as everyone has indicated. And, as a result of those compromises, we've seen the threat actors get bolder, braver. The demands are certainly increasing. The type of industries, right? Manufacturing is totally getting targeted. One that was never really worried about all of this before, right? And as Imran mentioned, right, it's not so much even the breach notification laws. I mean, they're there, they're going to be there. They give you 30 days, 60 days. It's the contractual obligations, it's the business issues, it's the communication issues. More and more, we're having to deal with the issue a lot sooner from an external standpoint, whether it's a contractual obligation, a messaging situation, social media. So yeah, a lot of the same, but a lot of different effect that it's having on organizations dealing with these incidents.
Yeah. Now, Priya, you had some points regarding the changes in ransomware attacks as well, didn't you? Primarily ransomware as a service.
Correct. So definitely, as there has been more opportunities for the threat actors, they have definitely also changed their business model per se, right? They found a way on how to, target or basically how to put out a wider net out there, right? So they have almost had a training ground for threat actors to grow throughout the ranks. So we have seen the smaller ones, and then, for example, so Kibi, Revel, even DarkSide, you can see the pattern, right? Starting from small and then just moving to bigger and bigger, and the ransomware being really big. Ransomware as a service has definitely grown. I know Dominic has seen a lot of that, especially for some of the US matters that we've worked on together. And I'll let Dominic explain some of the ones that he's seen.
Sure. Yep. Sorry about that. I mean, yes. I mean, we, certainly have seen, right, where, we have the sophisticated attackers, right? But we also have these sort of, hey, fly by night, Googling, and, able to very easily, right, exploit an environment. Where we see the difference in the sophistication is when it gets to the demands and then the negotiations. When we're dealing with a very sophisticated group, we're working with a threat actor negotiation firm to help us through that battle, the back and forth. That's the difference, though. Many of the unsophisticated ones are either going to re-extort, disappear, change their mind. They want 10 Bitcoin, then they want 20, then they go back down to 6, and like I said, they disappear for a little bit. And so it's frustrating, right? From a client perspective who is down and out, their backups are not viable. We need to figure out what kind of data has been exfiltrated. Whereas the sophisticated groups, right, they want to continue to build their business model, and they're going to, for the most part, cooperate, right? We're not going to see that, for the most part, that re-extortion. There's going to be cooperation with providing decryption keys, providing a file tree of data that's been, exfiltrated, examples of what's, been deleted. But with that sophisticated group also comes these leak sites, right, where they will post data, and it's either they're posting it because they haven't responded to that, or they threaten to post it, right? And so, I mentioned earlier, it's the confidential business information that's really of concern at the beginning, because threat actors are not going in and data mining for PII right away, right? Obviously, if it's an organization that's very heavily intensive with PII or PHI, they know they've hit the jackpot there. But for the most part, they're just sort of randomly posting, documents, and sometimes what they post are very sensitive. Maybe it's a upcoming acquisition that is very confidential. So that sort of posting from those more sophisticated groups is certainly becoming a bigger issue. But these fly-by-night ransomware as a service, we're going to continue to see more and more of that. It's a quick, easy buck for them, and the problems on the back end with the negotiations.
Yeah, and I would say with ransomware as a service, because of that, we are seeing a lot more industries, verticals being impacted, right? So again, like back to my point of them casting a wider net, they have a team harvesting the credentials, it's being posted in the dark web, that's now up for sale. And then another group is going in there to do a bit more damage, right? They're trying to find that vulnerability within the system, be it via RDP or even a software vulnerability, right? Be it a Microsoft patch or something that they know has not been done. As you know, similar to how Cyberclan would do a vulnerability scan, right? The threat actors are doing the same thing, and then typically selling that information to someone else to go to that next level of diving deeper into someone's network.
Yeah, thank you. I can see Dwayne nodding away. Do you have something to add?
Well, I can share a couple of stories just to back up, the disparity of the sophistication, right? Just to what Dom was talking about earlier, right? The really sophisticated groups, they've done their homework, right? We've even in the negotiation stuff, they've told, hey, well, you just acquired this company, so we know you have the money. They want a piece of that action. Or we've seen in the conversations, they've figured out who, the CEO of the parent company sort of is, and they use that in their connection version. And then the unsophisticated groups, it's somewhat comical, but not for the client. We've had them, you pay, and then they go call us back in 10 days. Like they just go on vacation in the middle of it, which is a bit crazy. We had one scenario, we're just about to sort of wrap it up, and then another sort of threat actor came out of the blue and was like, don't pay that guy, I'm the real threat actor. And they both had something, so I'm not quite sure what was going on there. They had a partnership fall apart or something, but it's a bit crazy, and it's all over the shop. It keeps us on our toes for sure.
Wow. Imran, do you have any experiences to share?
So maybe 2 quick points, and I think everybody has made excellent ones. But to pick on a point that Dominic made about leak sites, what we have seen and what has changed the dynamic a little bit, at least certainly here in Canada, is there are journalists which are now tracking leak sites consistently. This wasn't the case before. About a year ago, where were the instances that you had a journalist going on a CLOP or other website to figure out, whether there was any information of a company being leaked out. So the shaming part of it, which was in theory always there, or was happening on the dark net, now is becoming much more visible. So we're getting media requests much sooner, which often then prompts the client to take much quicker steps. So what you would do in a week perhaps gets compressed in a couple of days. And so that's a new factor we've seen. The other piece I want to pick up that Priya mentioned, which is absolutely correct. When we're looking at negotiations and looking at whether you pay or you don't pay, what we're trying to get is insights, right? I mean, this is what Cyberclan does. When you can tell me on a given group, what are they doing? We've seen them for the past 6 months do X, Y, and Z. This is what you can predict. And when you have a client who's quite stressed about the incident, obviously, to give them some predictability is really helpful. Where it gets more challenging is when you have newer players come in with no track record or an offshoot of an existing group, and we're not sure exactly how predictable they're going to be. So what we've seen is it's, I wouldn't say easier dealing with sophisticated groups, but it's more predictable in some ways because you know what their MO is. They will do this. They do come through in terms of posting or not posting data. They do keep their word. So that's the second point. One additional point I'll mention, and it gives me a lot of headache, and I'm sure Dominic as well. It's if a payment is ever made and you get a file tree, the file tree doesn't give you the file level access. It just gives you a snapshot of what the directories may look like or what the folders are. And then you're left with this difficult situation where you're trying to couple the forensic investigation with what partial information the attacker may have given you through this whole ransom process, and trying to marry those and get to a legal position, whether you notify, what the risk is, and so on. And that's where we find a lot of challenges because each organization, like Priya mentioned, is different because of the verticals. A healthcare organization risk is very different than a manufacturer's risk. So I think those are the 3 trend lines I've seen with complication around ransomware.
Wonderful, thank you. So my next question, are threat actors becoming more sophisticated? That one's up for grabs. Who would like to answer that one first? Hi, Dwayne.
I can touch. Sure. Hi. One thing that we've definitely seen, there's some that are more sophisticated for sure, right? We talked about that. There's definitely seen an increase in added pressure. We're seeing an increase in denial of service attacks on companies. I was in a meeting with a client. His cell phone rang. It was a accent on the other end, and he read back the email that client had just sent me about some activity and stuff, right? So they're getting more brass for sure, and putting some extra pressure on for sure.
I will definitely agree to that. Especially the extra pressure. We've had threat actors actually calling employees, as well as sending emails to employees, just different tactics to get the insured to pay, as well as the threat actor has even contacted some of the customers, right? So we are seeing that the threat actors are getting bolder. We've had a situation recently whereby the threat actor actually took control of the website of a company, and basically that's where they were making their threats. So I think over time, maybe it's also because now that space is getting very diluted, that there are more threat actors. So I think the folks are looking at how do we get that payment ahead of time before someone else, right? So again, it is a business model to them, right? So I guess at the end of the day, they also have to make that profit. And because of that, we're seeing them being bolder and as Dwayne mentioned, a bit more brass when it comes to payment.
Wonderful, thank you.
Maybe
yeah, no,
I can
go ahead, Imran.
Go ahead. No, go for it, Dominic. You had it first.
No, I was just going to say we were representing a law firm recently, and not only did they reach out to the employees saying you better tell your board or else you're not going to have a job, they reached out to clients, and then the scariest one is they started reaching out to opposing counsel, indicating that they had strategic playbooks on the case and discovery that wasn't provided yet, and so yeah, they're getting more sophisticated and bolder, I would say, is probably that, because every now and then we'll still see that lack of sophistication, right, as we talk about, but they're definitely getting bolder, and we'll continue to add that pressure.
Yeah, so I'll just add a couple quick points. When you talk about sophistication, there's two parts to it, right? There's technical sophistication and there's strategic pressure type sophistication, which we're talking about. Based on the forensic reports I've seen, I haven't seen like new techniques particularly being introduced here. It's always the same kind of exploits they're using to get in. So I don't think there's been much evolution on that. I mean, they're smart, they never underestimate the adversary, but generally speaking, I haven't seen like a new way of them getting in that's being exploited as a general proposition. It's always the same. To Dominic, Priya, and Dwayne's views, I completely agree. They are getting more bolder in terms of how they're putting pressure on. And where 4 or 5 years ago it's spray and pay kind of approach, now they're actually doing their diligence and looking at what kind of strategic documents you have. We've heard about it. I see it more and more these days in negotiations. They'll send you a copy of the insurance policy with the excerpt. They will send you a copy of your financial statements, most current ones. They'll share and they'll go through materials. Go, you don't think this is information that's sensitive? They're saying you're seeing quality of the data being presented at the early stage of the negotiation to show that they're serious. So I think that's where the strategy comes in. The phone calls, I've seen those facts coming in. The law firm one is interesting, Dom. We've seen that as well. A smaller firm out in Western Canada had the same issue where they were being contacted by opposing counsel, including Justice Canada in some cases, which is stressful for anyone to get something from Justice Canada. So they are getting bolder from that perspective in terms of strategy for sure.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you for sharing those. So at the beginning of this webinar, we did discuss some of the reasons that there was a rise in cases at the beginning of the pandemic. My next question for you is, do you feel that this was probably like a lack of education with employees prior to the pandemic hitting? Do you think that there was a lack of training employees in understanding how they could be the first line of defense in stopping the companies that they work for suffering from a cyber attack? Priya.
I wouldn't say it was a lack of training per se. I think that everyone tried to mobilize the workforce as best as they could, right? I think, yes, there is that training component that came out later, but I would say that, I think everyone tried their best, right? Especially the IT departments for most of the insurance, well, not even just our insurance, but everyone out there. I think the main priority was to keep everyone safe, right? Mobilize the workforce, get everyone to work from home. They procured hardware, software that was basically also doubling their expenditure, their IT expenditure, right? I think that we may have taken it a bit lightly in the sense that we didn't know how the threat actors would take advantage of the situation because everyone was just so focused on the health aspect of COVID, right? So I think it was just a perfect storm, right? Whereby folks did take advantage of it. And I think that, it's glad to see that companies are now working the way to how to train their staff better, how to have regular training, and more education. And I think, and also looking at proactive services. So I think we're definitely on the right track with a lot of companies out there.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, I would just add that, and I mentioned before too, I think actually organizations were doing a pretty good job pre-COVID. I felt like we got them there, right? For the most part, they were doing a lot of training awareness, and then we had to press that brake, right? The problem is that while organizations pressed the brake, legislature did not, right? So we're sort of seeing while organizations aren't doing, or at least putting on hold those proactive pre-breach services, we're seeing, obviously CCPA, but that then now got amended. We're seeing Virginia with a Privacy Act. Oregon's got one proposed, right? So in the states here, it's very reminiscent of the breach notice laws, right? Where we have state by state now coming out or proposing these privacy acts, which have a significant component of pre-breach services needed, right? Risk assessments required, training, policies, procedures. And so we're going to have to, step off that brake and hit the gas in order to be compliant with all of these acts that are coming out literally by the weeks. We're seeing new ones proposed. So I think Priya's right. Organizations are now doing a much better job as we are sort of, shifting back into somewhat of normalcy or hybrid environment of working, but they're gonna, have to comply because of these privacy acts that are coming out.
Yeah, I think we actually discussed that the other day, didn't we? We posted a blog post recently about the different privacy acts across the US. It's funny as well because in the UK we have, Parliament. They come up with one bill, that's it, it covers the country. In fact, it covers the entirety of the UK. Whereas, with you guys, it's all state by state, province by province. And so does that mean that if a company has a base in one state and another, they then have to apply those privacy laws across their individual privacy laws across their whole business and make sure that they're fully compliant?
Yeah, so here in the United States, it's not just physical location, but transacting business in another state. And also if you have, residents of another state's personal identifiable information, that could bring you into the purview of their law. So it's and that's another thing. Every one of these states' acts are different. So some have certain thresholds of dollars as to how much you have to have as annual gross revenue. Some are based on more transaction level detail with the state. So, but for the most part, you're not going to be able to say, oh, we are just located in New York and we are only going to worry about that Privacy Act.
Yeah. Dwayne, you're nodding your head.
Oh, well, I'm in BC in Canada. We actually have some of the strictest privacy laws. Well, BC is the strictest province across Canada, and Canada is a little more strict. So I think we're in pretty good shape. It was actually on the other side of the fence. I actually saw as almost a bit of a handcuff to us, to be honest, because there's a lot of good applications that we could use. Unfortunately, the way the law was set, we couldn't use them because they maybe were US based. So that was just the flip side look, I suppose, of some of that. The only thing I was going to touch on, just on that, the question in general is, and it actually it touches on one of the chat questions and stuff as well. A lot of companies were just not made up for the remote work, right? Like, and I came from one that was like that. Like all the security posture that's going to protect people was in the data center. All that was sort of the points of entry and exit. And then when it sort of split apart, like all it did was just show how sort of vulnerable the individuals and stuff are, you know, now that they're working from home, right? And it's tough, right? And the, you know, I've always joked sort of functionality and security are sort of opposing forces. We can make it super secure, but you know, people aren't going to get much work done. So it's I have seen the trend is slowly getting to where, you know, more people, you know, are aware of it. But probably, and COVID's been good for that, and the rise of ransomware is good for that. But you know, I would say a year or two ago, outside of, you know, maybe a small portion of IT, a lot of people didn't necessarily even really care, or you know, they didn't want to the investment in the security postures and stuff just wasn't made to probably what it needed to be. And unfortunately, I think a lot of companies are paying the price today because of that. I probably don't make any friends just by making that statement. But.
Imran, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll come at it slightly differently from an angle when I sort of put myself in a year ago. You got to remember, in March and April of 2020, we didn't know how long this was going to last. You know, a lot of the politicians or those who are sort of in positions of power to make decisions for us said this may be a couple months, maybe 6 months, and now we're well over a year into this, and we still don't know when we're going to go back in. And when you look at companies, any company for that matter, you may recall in the first 6 months, there was panic about whether they can actually survive, hoarding cash, hoarding resources, making sure that they can survive through the pandemic, whatever period of time that was going to be. So I sort of understand in terms of what they were focusing on, which was cash is king, make sure you trim down only on the most essential pieces. And look, definition of essential, is it IT security and cyber, or is it paying your employees before you lose them and forewarning them? It was a challenge. I think what happened was, as Priya mentioned earlier, I think it got better and better over time. I think where we're at now, today we talk about virtual and remote working, it's a given, right? We can get onto a call via Zoom or Teams and have a conversation. I think most people are going to look at a hybrid, like Dominic mentioned, post-pandemic. So I think the investment strategy when it's going to come to cyber is going to change. But you know, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the people who are making decisions at the time. The last point I'll mention very quickly, Canada especially is a mid-market economy or a small and medium-sized business economy. Certainly we have large enterprise clients, but you know, it is a mid-market economy, which is, you know, pretty small compared to other jurisdictions, and therefore IT resources, funding for those resources is always a challenge. So if you had a great project going on in terms of training your staff with phishing exercises and awareness and all that stuff, that's great. Pandemic hits and you're like, okay, let me just focus on surviving first and foremost, because I don't know if I've got the cash reserves to survive through the whole thing. And I think when things stabilize, which we're at now, we're in a hot economy. Every corporate lawyer I speak to these days, they're busy with M&A transactions because people are moving in that direction. They're optimistic about the future. We're seeing that kind of investment. So I think it has gone better. And my hope is the number of incidents that are being reported are going to be decreasing as well.
Wonderful. Right, my final question before we move on to questions from attendees is, what is the future of cybersecurity for small to medium enterprise as we come out of the pandemic? So Dwayne and I actually had a chat about this a couple of weeks ago. So I'd really like it if you wouldn't mind kicking this off.
Sure. And probably my colleagues will agree with that. I think there's, I mean, it's public all over, you know, LinkedIn and other social media sites that a lot of companies are going to continue with this shift to sort of remote work, either part-time, full-time, right? I know in some past lives, real estate is expensive. It is expensive, right? It's probably, you know, next to maybe labor, it's probably might be the single most expensive part of a business. So I do believe we're going to see a shift. People are going to, save some costs on the real estate side of the fence, and hopefully at least take a good portion of that and put it into the cybersecurity side of the funding, which is, like I said, it's been insufficiently funded, historically, probably over the past decade, I would argue. Where I think that investment needs to go, my personal is within that endpoint, right? Because now you do have, people are more mobile, they're going to stay that way. Whether they're, working in coffee shops, working from home, working from the in-laws, whatever that looks like, it needs, that security sort of needs to follow the people no matter where they are. But
wonderful, thank you. Priya.
No, I think definitely that there's going to be more focus on security in terms of, for example, companies being a bit more proactive, as we mentioned before, training exercises. I think people doing regular scans, vulnerability scans will be predominantly something that a lot of companies will be looking at for pen testing. Again, these are not the small companies, but the mid-sized companies. I think that's where they will look to invest some dollars. I think definitely budget for cybersecurity for most organizations have most likely been increased given the past year, right? And the need for it. Also, having events such as SolarWinds and Half-Yum happening, I think it's also made everyone think that they're not invincible, right? And it's not maybe something that they're doing, but working with third-party vendors, I think third-party vendors' contracts are going to come under a lot of scrutiny. How do they protect themselves better if one of the third-party vendors has a cyber incident, right? So I think companies are going to tend to look at cybersecurity more holistically moving forward, as opposed to just with one lens. I think also there's probably an increase of CISOs out there over the next few months, if not over this year. Definitely the spend in cybersecurity, I see it as going up, which will be beneficial to all companies who does invest in proactive services moving forward.
Brilliant, thank you. Imran.
I'll just add something slightly different in terms of what we've seen. Just to give you an idea, certainly we do a lot of breach response work, but we also used to historically do pre-breach work. And to be completely transparent, it was important, but a lot of companies didn't feel it was worth the effort or time to review their contract or to do tabletop exercises. And really it was reserved, quite frankly, to the largest enterprise clients who wanted to do it for compliance reasons or other reasons. What we have seen, and I think it's a positive move, is a big investment on pre-breach preparation. So it's, this is where organizations will actually go and look at the supply chain contracts. They are going to invest in employee training that we talked about earlier. They are going to do regular tabletop exercises. From some of the conversations I've had, I think the driver has been, I think generally speaking, and Priya can speak to insurance much better than I can, I think is to also show that they're a good risk to insure to various carriers. Look, all the great stuff we've done, because we're prepared, we'll be able to respond in a more intelligent, systematic, and cohesive way. So we've seen an uptick on that type of investment, where historically, and it still remains the case, it was very technology focused. There's more of a push on the governance and the team response and the role of insurance, quite frankly. And, what can the insurer bring to the table? Who are the vendors we can tap into? How can we work with them? So I think that's where it's headed. The other thing I'll mention very briefly, I think there's going to be a further evolution on ransomware. What I've seen is historically you had double encryption or double extortion. You had encryption plus data theft. We're seeing now some groups moving towards just pure data theft, because they feel it's a quicker way of doing it, because a lot of times the strategy is pretty straightforward. Check for backups, engage with threat actor. Once backups are not available, then you really start negotiating seriously. And that can take 5 to 7 days in some cases. What the attackers are doing is they're reducing that time frame significantly, saying, forget about the encryption. We know we've got you because of the data piece. We'll just force you to pay, and we'll put a clock on it too. So I think we'll see more and more cases of those in 2021 and 2022.
Thank you for that. Dominic.
Sure. Obviously, everything that everyone has said, I would take a different angle on the just in addition to scrutiny from regulators. Here in the States, we have always seen, right, certain AGs sort of popping up with regard to, reviewing an incident after we report it, sending out data requests, helping the U.S. Health and Human Services Department, Office of Civil Rights. They've always been very active in investigating healthcare data breaches, but we're seeing more and more state AGs that are interested in more and more incidents. And then you couple with these privacy acts. For instance, where California just amended CCPA and specifically came out with a separate governing entity that is going to be tasked with enforcing CCPA, that you start to see the trend, right? So I think, and hey, let's face it, it's a moneymaker a little bit for these regulators as well, right? For these self-funded offices. So I think we're going to continue to see the same types of incidents, same, different twists, agree on the exfiltration and extortion piece of it. But I think we're going to see the regulators get a lot more interested, more than they already are, not only on the breach notices, but also on the compliance with the Privacy Acts.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your input. So that's the last of my questions. However, we do have some questions flying in from our attendees. So we actually had this one sent to us before the webinar via email from Richard Vanderbook. He said, why are ransomware and data breaches legal issues? How can we limit personal private information from network storage or better protect it? So 2 questions in one there. Who would like to tackle that one?
Well, there are legal issues because we have laws that say, hey, when that type of information is compromised, we have a legal notice obligation to give to that individual to let them know that their information, such as their social security number or social insurance number, has been compromised. Same thing with credit cards. Then you get into the card brands, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, that want notice. And then, as we mentioned earlier, right, the legal component side of that, where you may have a contractual notice obligation. You may have signed something that said, hey, upon suspected incident, you are to contact us. And many times it's much shorter than any of the laws. So lots of legal components. Obviously, the attorney-client privilege, as Imran had mentioned earlier, that's really important as well. So when we bring in these vendors, such as Cyberclan, we want to make sure we are cloaking that investigation through attorney-client privilege to try and prevent as much as we can from that type of information being discoverable. So a quarterback function that we serve, but also privilege and the legal notification and contractual obligations that arise.
Wonderful, thank you. Dwayne, do you have any input regarding the second half of that question? How can we limit personal private information from network storage or better protect it?
Sure. Yeah. No, I can. And the harsh reality is there's some pretty basic steps that don't cost a lot of money that would position companies better off than they are today, right? And it's I actually kind of, it's somewhat shocking to be honest, just like basic strong passwords. It takes, while the threat actors, brute force a lot of these passwords and stuff, don't use the built-in usernames that come with, with Windows and stuff. 8-character password, it can be cracked in a relatively short period of time nowadays, right? If you're going to have service type accounts that make these connections and behind the scenes, make them super strong. Obviously the use of MFA, most people don't have MFA on internal services and stuff, but that would help. Just staying patch right, and I get it, like especially in a remote workforce, staying current, patching and stuff. Again, a lot of the technology is designed for within the data center. That's where it pulls down, say, Microsoft patches, deploys them out to and it's not really built for the people to kind of go direct, right? So there's some technology changes a lot of companies need to make to adjust as they remote work, but some basic steps, like don't have users logging on as administrative accounts by default, right? And there's some basic things, and our company, will have these conversations with clients and stuff quite a bit. And there's some pretty simple steps that a lot of companies can do that position them better. You can get pretty sophisticated by having it on separate networks, having separate authentication mechanisms and stuff. But and if you want to take it to that level, great. But even some of the baby steps will help people out.
Wonderful. Imran, do you have something to add?
I just wanted to, and I know today's session is not focused on Canadian or privacy law, generally speaking, but when you're looking proactively in preparedness, one of the challenges we always have is we go in, we speak with a client when an incident occurs, and then, oh yeah, we have a lot of information. Well, you've got a great data retention policy. Yeah, we do. We never really implemented it. So regrettably, we haven't followed whatever the 7-year, cutoff date for the retention policy we had for the past 25 years. So it's pretty obvious when I say this, but the larger your footprint's going to be from a digital standpoint, the more risk you have. And the challenge is, as we talked a bit earlier, a lot more data is being exfiltrated. And as a result, the data mining that goes along with it is not only becoming more cumbersome, but becoming quite complicated in terms of timing and resources. One of the biggest challenges we're seeing right now, especially from a media and public relations standpoint, is why did it take you this long to notify us? Anything beyond a couple of days, typically people start getting angry about it. So that's fine. I get that part. But when you start hitting the couple of weeks or months time frame, you may be opening yourself up to criticism. Yes, it took you time to review, but why did you even have that data in the first place? And when you look at the FAQs, when there's a call center set up, for example, a lot of the questions are focused on why do you have it? Why did you keep it? Was a legal justification for it? Did you have a retention policy? More importantly, did you have a control to actually make sure it was actually implemented and tracked? And what we're seeing more and more, regrettably, is some of our privacy commissioners receiving complaints, either in the health sector where you have to disclose it in notifications, or at the private sector side of things where it's slightly different, where you're going to have to deal with a regulator who's coming in with a very specific question, which wasn't the case, quite frankly, a couple of years ago. There, to Dominic's point, the regulators are getting smarter. They are developing capacity because they were criticized for years for not having it. And the questions are more intelligent, quite frankly, and challenging the self-assessment that an organization is doing. So we've seen that piece come in. And again, I know today's session is not focused on privacy law, but in Canada, there's a wholesale change and renewal of privacy legislation, much more in line with the CCPA and the GDPR, but still quite Canadian and quite enforcement focused if you're not going to be able to demonstrate compliance. So I put that out there because I see sort of that as the next frontier in Canada, at least. Still a little while off, but certainly not that far away that we shouldn't be taking note of it.
Wonderful, thank you. We've had a question in from Rod McLaughlin. Have you seen an increase in double extortion attacks? Priya, would you like to start?
Sorry, definitely there has been an increase in double extortions too. I think Imran mentioned this earlier. Just knowing the type of data that they have, right, that is bringing the threat actors back once they've realized the quality of data that they may have. They're changing their strategy in terms of dollar amounts. Or the other thing that we really discourage is payment for suppression of data, right? Because we have seen it in the past whereby we paid the threat actor and then the data was still posted, or they threaten like, hey, we still have the data, so we will post in 7 days if you don't pay X amount again, right? So again, I think that at the end of the day, these are threat actors, they are criminals, right? So anything is possible at the end of the day too. So I think you just have to do your due diligence and make sure that you're working within the privacy laws, as Dominic and Imran has mentioned, as well as juggling the fact that the insurer has to get back up and running in a timely manner.
Wonderful. We've got another one in from a gentleman called Sandy. Now, I think we've already really answered this one, which is what's the general sentiment on the return to work, especially security around flexible working arrangements going forward? So we've sort of already covered that, haven't we, with looking at remote work continuing, which we believe it will, and also looking at the increase in training your workforce. We've had another question from a gentleman called Keith Lewis. Now, I believe this one is probably aimed at you, Priya, which is, do you write cyber as a standalone?
Sorry. I think definitely there is a BBR policy out there that Beazley does have. It's part of our treaty. I would suggest that you do speak to one of the brokers about that in further details. But we definitely have a good cyber policy package out there.
Wonderful, thank you. And then the final question that we've had in, again, from Rod McLaughlin. So this is, have you worked with police agencies in resolving ransom attacks or reported such matters afterward? Now, I think I'd like to start with Dwayne on this one, because I feel like I already know the answer.
Well, I would actually say it's probably a better position for either Imran or Dominic to probably talk with the
Sure.
Dom, did you want to kick it off, or maybe I should, and then you can clean up?
Go ahead, Imran. Thanks.
So I'll talk about the Canadian piece, and then you can segue US, and we can also talk a little bit about sort of cross-border. So it's a good question that Rod asks. In terms of what we've seen, here's what we've seen. Historically, it was a bit disjointed in Canada for enforcement agencies. So you report to law enforcement, could have been local PD, could have been RCMP, could be provincial police in Ontario or Quebec, for example, or it could have been our national security agency. So different people were reaching out at different levels of law enforcement and getting different answers. About 3 or 4 years ago, when we had a budget that was tabled by the current government, they had invested significant money to coordinate and liaise between the different law enforcement agencies, and is being coordinated by the CSC, which is the equivalent of our NSA in Canada. And so the idea was, at every level of law enforcement, let's have a consistent approach in terms of how we're going to take intake of information so that we can take it and then share it amongst ourselves for, whatever we need to use it for. And I'll talk about what they can do with it in a minute. And what they did was they developed a Part A and a Part B questionnaire. So if you do report to law enforcement, typically it's your local police department. If you're in a province like Ontario or in Quebec, where you've got provincial police, depending on which privacy law or which regulating law applies to you, you may go to them as well. Or it may be RCMP if you're in a remote region where they don't have local police with specialized cyber expertise. Either way, whoever you report it to, at some point, law enforcement is going to come back to you and say, here's our questionnaire. Part A is what they're calling as bare necessity of information. They want your IOCs, or indicators of compromise, Bitcoin wallet, copy of the ransom note, so on and so forth. And Part B is what I call, if they want to call it, nice to have. We'd like to get a bit more color. We like to know what industry, all that other stuff that you may be involved in. What happens with that is they take that information, they put it into a database, which is then shared across law enforcement in Canada. And what they're looking for is trend lines. Is a particular industry being targeted? Do we need to take any additional steps? Do we need to start notifying organizations, putting alerts out through our various agencies to let people know that there's a risk? So I think in terms of engaging with law enforcement, I think they're getting more sophisticated, a bit more coordinated, quite frankly. In terms of their real on-the-ground help, you don't really get any help from them. The only time you get help is in national security related matters, where they will tell you something's going on in your environment that you don't know about. Or if our US colleagues call them and say, you got a problem north of the border, you better figure it out. You got jurisdiction, and we get a phone call that way. In terms of prosecution, there was an attempt to have a bit of an uptick. Toronto Cyber Crimes Division is trying to lead that charge, but it's a hit or miss. It takes multiple years. So short term, nothing. Longer term, possibility, but no guarantees.
Yeah, a lot of the same here in the States. A couple of years ago was quite disjointed. FBI is sort of taking the lead, specifically on ransomware events. But and the U.S. Treasury just came out a couple of months ago. And so before we are ever paying or thinking about paying a threat actor group, we need to do two very important things. One of them is to report it to FBI, and they have set up a portal through ic3.gov. Which similar to what Imran was discussing, it then gets shared amongst different agencies. They've done a nice job very recently of splitting up the variants. So the threat actor group, the variant of the ransomware, Sodanakibi, egregor, networker, by regional office. So it's not, you may get contacted by an FBI agent that is not, located anywhere near you. It's because that regional office has been assigned to that variant. So that's been really nice. And assisted a little bit with threat intelligence. But so I said there have to be two things. First was making sure we notify law enforcement through that IC3. And then second, making sure we are running that Bitcoin wallet address, anything we can through the OFAC check to make sure we are not funding a sanctioned entity. If so, lots of trouble for everybody involved. So two very important steps. But and last thing, just to echo what Imran said, couple, maybe 10 years ago, law enforcement would be boots on the ground helping us. It's a little bit of frustration now with clients. We get, why isn't FBI here, to help us do that? And obviously capacity and bandwidth and just the resources are not there. So it's more of a one-way street where we are feeding them info and they're building their threat intelligence database, as opposed to them, sort of helping us boots on the ground with some limited exceptions.
Wonderful, thank you. From a UK perspective, if anyone is watching from the UK, which I hope you are, if you do need to report any sort of cybercrime, firstly, obviously, hopefully you have cyber insurance in the first place, and you're able to utilise that, and they can help you with legal counsel regarding that as well. However, you can also report cyber incidents to the National Cybersecurity Centre here in the UK. That is the ncsc.gov.uk. So just a little bit of further information for any of our UK participants there. Well, thank you so much for all of your input today. I hope that everyone who's watched has found this session particularly informative and has helped answer some of their questions. I've just seen here that Keith Lewis says, thank you, Priya. So obviously some of the answers that our participants needed have been received. I just wanted to thank all of our panelists for taking the time to participate today. And again, thank you to our participants for the great questions at the end there. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will make sure that a replay link is sent out to anyone who attended or wasn't able to. And we will also make sure that everyone receives the contact details for the people who have participated here today, so that, if there are any further questions that do arise, they can be answered. So again, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for all of your input. It's greatly appreciated.